Hello everybody. This is Arif, and welcome to our webinar series. We have a very special guest with us. Michiel Jonker is from South Africa. We are in the similar time zones, but on different seasons at the moment. So, since we are in summertime, he's in wintertime, and I hope everything is well over there. And let me introduce you to Michiel. Michiel is a director at Futura International, and he's a trained futurist and assists the clients as a business and digital foresight, and also IT cyber governance advisory. So he has more than 26 years of experience, in these fields, and also as a director and partner at two multinational audit and advisory companies. And he was responsible for a wide variety of assignments and gained experience in numerous industries, both public and private. And he's worked with both listed and non-listed clients, and he still does. So as a futurist, he believes that the business is in its core, it's about opportunities and risks. So this is what we're going to be focusing on today, opportunities and risks. And he also believes that businesses need to pursue opportunities and to manage the risks associated with pursuing such opportunities. So in very short, Michiel predicts that sustainable cybersecurity risk management can be achieved in the future by means of a paradigm shift in the industry. Well, he believes the key to success is to simplify cybersecurity measures. So welcome, Michiel. And we're very curious to listen to your foresights. It's on to you.
Thank you, Arif. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We appreciate that. I'm going to start with first introducing myself, and actually just to give some background to what I'm going to talk about. You see the box on the right-hand side, and as you know, the saying is that we should think outside the box. In my opinion, to think outside the box is actually a very bad idea. You should actually think, if you want to get outside your box, jump out and jump into someone else's box. Now, what do I mean with that? Henry Ford got his idea about the assembly line from the abattoir. Now, obviously, the abattoir disassemble, and a motor car factory actually assemble again. So Henry Ford got the idea of an assembly line from the abattoir. In other words, in another discipline. He actually jumped in someone else's box to actually get that idea of an assembly line. In the old days before the assembly line, they basically assembled the car in a circle. So in the middle of the circle was the car that they assembled, was busy assembling, and all the parts of the car in the circle. And as we know, the assembly line was the idea for the next century and even today. In other words, Henry Ford actually jumped in someone else's box. And that is why I say that to be outside the box is a very bad idea. You must be either in your own box, but preferably sometimes in someone else's box. Now, as futurists, people ask me, what is a futurist? Many futurists basically use their left brain and their right brain. And basically that means they are used to apply interdisciplinary thinking. So I'm not only apply the thoughts that were generated in my industry, you can call it IT, cybersecurity, the data privacy industry, or governance, risk and compliance industry, just to give a broad term to the industry that most of us are most properly working in. And so when I derive new ideas for cybersecurity or for data privacy, I basically also look at other disciplines and what I can learn from other disciplines, jumping outside my box, jumping in someone else's box. So my background is IT audits and SOC 2 audits, data privacy, cybersecurity. But most importantly, I'm thinking as a futurist. And so what I'm going to say today might not sit well with you to some extent, but it is okay. And if you disagree with me, you're more than welcome to disagree with me, because I'm thinking more from a futurist perspective by using other disciplines as well. Now, the idea is, and I will get to that point, so when you ask yourself, but where is this person taking us? I'm going to get to the point where we discuss the BugBounter program, which is BugBounter. So the name is BugBounter. There's their website, and Future International, and I'm a director in Future International. We work together in order to assist clients by reducing their complexity in cybersecurity, and very importantly, their cost, and then also groupthink. So you can think, if you only stay in your own box, let us call it the governance, risk and compliance box, there is going to be some groupthink, and we're going to talk about that. Just one principle that I want to get out of the way is, up to today, I find even very educated, highly educated people that would think in either or terms. It's either party A that is right, or it's party B. Could not be both. And that is actually a huge problem in life in general, because it is almost impossible that only party A can be right, or only party B can be 100% right. It is not possible. And party A as well as party B might have things that are right, that in their thinking is right. So, you know, a good example is in many countries, party politics, political parties would say, if you're on this party, you will toe the line. I think it's an extremely bad idea because it creates groupthink. Another thing that I'm going to stand still on is groupthink. And groupthink, in my opinion, plays a huge role in the ineffectiveness, to some extent, of cybersecurity controls and IT controls. And groupthink is something that we have to reduce. And at the end, I will show you how BugBounter can actually assist in reducing groupthink. Now, the 1960s, I'm going to come back to the 1960s, is another main theme in my presentation. We are still sitting with the consequences of the 1960s and the 1970s, the 1980s, and even in the 1990s, when I started my career, the first thing that I saw was the mainframe. And the 1960s had a certain paradigm. We're going to look at that because we are still carrying the consequences of the 1960s. Now, first of all, on the right-hand side of this presentation, I took away it is a fast food chain in South Africa, very popular and very close to us. I took this photo. You can see here wooden palisades, and it's not so clear on the photo, but this building they built 7 years back. And then I put up these wooden palisades. And when I saw it the first time, I thought by myself, it looks nice, but what's the function of that? And secondly, who's going to maintain that? Because if they don't maintain it, rain and weather will eventually make sure that it doesn't look good. No maintenance leads to decay. Now, what I want to say is, in the next slide, I will show you that there's even research that back it up, is that it is human nature to add complexity to our life. And one generation built on top of another generation, and what that generation built, and they make it even better and more complex. So we see it in globalization. Bureaucracy is a typical phenomenon where bureaucracy takes on its own kind of life eventually. We see it in the EU. I think it's the biggest bureaucracy in the world. Not that it is not working. I think it is to some extent we should give him some benefit of a doubt, because I think it's quite achievable to get 27 countries to agree. But it is a massive, massive bureaucracy, and it's getting more and more complex. More legislation is added every year. There's not only the EU, any country, more and more acts, more laws that are added and making the general life of people more complex. We're dealing with complex systems, complex computer systems. We're dealing with interconnected systems. And then in our industry, governance, compliance, and risk and compliance discipline, we keep adding best controls, and we tell our clients you must implement it. More best practice frameworks that are added, more controls, and more controls. My opinion is that the future cannot sustain today's current best practices. Now we'll come back to this point and why I think that complexity is going to destroy us. Just by the way, when I say maintenance is a big problem, it goes without saying that certain things in life are nice to have. They do not really have a functionality, or the functionality doesn't really add a lot of value. And what I try to say is that when we implement, and this is the problem, is that when people design, build, and implement, they never think of to maintain, as we can see here on the wooden palisades. But there are, of course, stuff that we build, computer systems that we build, design, build, and which are becoming more complex, but they do deliver functionality. And I don't say we should not do that, but we have to consider the complexity that we add. Now, this can be backed up by, and here's one example, my first example of a historian, a person in another box, where I jumped out of my box and I jumped in the historian's box to see what the historians say. Now, Joseph Tainter, you can see that he wrote a book, The Collapse of Complex Societies. But if you want to read only a short version, here's a screenshot of a journal, academic journal that he wrote, The Social Complexity and Sustainability. And he did a study, and one of the ideas that he came up with is that complexity eventually destroys if you cannot simplify complexity. So you see there my heading, simplifying complexity. It's a bit of a funny heading, but he did studies, and he looked at the Roman Empire and said that the Roman Empire eventually collapsed because of complexity. For example, in the tax system and how they collect tax, as well as the entire bureaucracy imploded. Now, it is true that the Roman Empire had ups and downs through hundreds of years, but eventually in the 5th century AD, they collapsed. But this is one of the reasons. Now, of course, there are many other reasons why the Roman Empire collapsed if we apply the both-and principle and don't think in either-or terms only. But when you look at the Byzantine Empire, as you know, the Roman Empire split, and there was a Western Roman Empire situated in Rome, and then Caesar Constantinople moved to the city of today is Istanbul, and he started the city Constantinople, which was the Eastern Roman Empire. And it's the Byzantine Empire also had its ups and downs, but eventually they were heading to collapse as well. And at some point, they simplified things in order to cut cost. And one of the things that they did was to allocate to people farms. And obviously, if you have a farm and you're attacked by enemy, you're going to protect your farm. So by default, they had soldiers for whom they didn't pay, and those soldiers protected the Byzantine Empire. So they simplified complexity and they reduced cost because complexity was busy to destroy them. And I want to come back to the 1960s. And there was a paradigm that in the 1960s that you could control almost everything in your organization. I say almost because it is not 100% true. There was still fraud that happened, so you could not 100% control people, but you have quite a lot of control over your employees. It goes without saying that I do not have control over people that are outside my organization, but I have pretty much control over the people in my organization. Furthermore, it was the mainframe environment and the internet was not there. So what I say here is the IT environments were quite isolated islands, IT islands. Now, I know that the island is isolated, but I try to make a point here. And the other thing is that what is important is that they were quite isolated from outside interference to a great extent, if we think in terms of IT. And another thing is with groupthink is they rely quite a lot on in-house human resources. And if they did make use of service providers, quite tightly control those service providers. And if I say they, I say the world, we got used to it. And we basically cultivated this warm, fuzzy feeling among each other. And then the internet came. And billions of people are today connected. Now, IT people see normally the internet as interconnected computers and servers and so on, and mobile devices. And although it is true, let us apply the both and principle, it is also people that are connected. And I basically see the internet primarily as interconnected people and not as interconnected computers. And this is very important. And this requires a paradigm shift. And the last point what I just want to say here is when you are connected to the internet, in my book, I cannot care less how many firewalls you have and protection you have. You're part of the internet. That's it. You're part of, I think it's 4 billion people now connected to the internet. What is the internet? And this is the problem. If you see it as interconnected people, as the main thing of the internet, immediately you're dealing with a complex system. Now, this is a topic, another topic. We cannot go into detail on this. But the complex system is where there are 2 people or more. As soon as you have people, there's a complex system. It doesn't apply only to people. The rainforest in Brazil, in the Amazon, is also a very complex system. But one thing that we have to understand is a complex system and people outside your organization, you cannot predict what they're going to do, number one. And number 2, you have no control over them. And most certainly, they are not bound by your policies. They cannot care less. Mm-hmm. So as soon as we are connected to the internet, we have a paradigm problem because at board level, we see, and my experience is that many board members, and even at executive level, there's a 1960s mindset when it comes to control. In the 1960s, we had quite a lot of control over our people. Our IT environments were extremely isolated, some not connected at all to other computers outside the organization. The internet was not there. And that control concept is still in the governance, risk and compliance community as well. And a lot of our best practices, it doesn't matter what framework I'm taking, there's still a sense of we can control things. And the problem is with a complex system, it is not a linear system. If you look at the cartoon here, it looks like a workshop that executives did by thinking linear terms. And when you walk out in reality, you are dealing with a complex system. In linear systems, it's very easy to identify cause and effect, but not in a complex system at all. But my sense is that at board level, there's still that mindset of linear thinking, and we have control over our security. And there's even an expectation, even if they do not mention it in words, there's still an expectation that we should have 100% security. And the first thing that happens when you are hacked is that the CIO is called in. If he or she is happy, they do not get fired. But there's a lot of hula baloo because we got hacked. And the reason why there's a lot of hula baloo is because there's still an expectation, even if it is not in verbal terms, that we can have 100% security. Now, I agree, there is some security. We can have low level, medium level, and high level security. The only 100% security is, of course, if we unplug our computers. And there is also, from the 1960s up to today, there's a fixation with prevention. And it is a fixation with prevention, and that is built. And this is very important if you can remember this. It's built on the assumption of success. That when we build our design and build our controls, our IT controls and our cybersecurity controls, we will have success. And your preventive controls will succeed. So that is a wrong paradigm that originated from the 60s. And we have to get a paradigm shift. Another problem that originated from the 60s when we talk IT is again the groupthink thing. And many times when you hire a company that is doing pen testing for you, vulnerability assessments and so on, most probably the company employs people from that country. Most probably many of them went to schools with more or less the same curriculums. Yes, there could be private schools, public schools, but there's a general curriculum in that country. Normally, same universities and colleges with more or less the same curriculums. And then, of course, every country got its own culture, national culture, but also business corporate culture. And the problem is that if you make use of only South African people to do pen testing, then you will definitely have some group think among those people, because there's cross-influence between all the service providers in cybersecurity that is doing pen testing and so on. People are jumping from organizations, and there's pretty much some groupthink when it comes to a specific country. That is another problem. The solution is, of course, diversity. And I believe that we must, and BugBounter actually provides that opportunity, must use human resources from different countries. And these people might differ from your own country's groupthink. They might think differently. And another point is when you do it, collaboration. In the 21st century, we need more of that in cybersecurity. In the 60s, it was our tribe, and our tribe will protect ourselves, and we depend on our tribe's members' skills to protect ourselves. And I think we are way past that line. Apologies for my dog. That happens when you are actually working from home.
Now, can we just pause for a few minutes over here, because let's ask our audience, because I think diversity is also, a very hot topic, not only from the cybersecurity perspective, but also from the, business perspective. And usually, unfortunately, when we talk about diversity, a lot of people think about gender, age, these type of diversities. But the most critical one is the thought diversity, which you mentioned as the diverse thinking. And if we can bring in thought diversity in our businesses, not only from cybersecurity perspective, but from every perspective, we will benefit. So I was wondering, what our participants think about what's going on in their organizations in terms of diversity. So let's just get a few answers to this poll. And after today's session, we can get back to our audience and share with our findings. And also, considering the same for everything, it also reminds me the fact of unconscious bias idea, because we tend to be unconsciously biased towards the people who think similar like us. So that's also but that's also something that narrows down our point of views, but also in other ways helps us keep safe. So there are pros and cons
Absolutely.
to everything, yeah.
Absolutely, Arif.
Okay, so I think that's it. We received some answers. I'm going to finish the poll. Okay, so let me just share with everyone. So I'm very happy to see that low is the minimum. That's good, and we are seeing some moderate to high. So at least that makes me happy, at least to see like this, and I hope to see
It's a
more
good
high.
one.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes, yes.
Sorry to interrupt, and please continue if you like.
So I just want to come back to the fixation with prevention. And yes, of course, prevention is the first line of defense. And be sure that I do not say that prevention is wrong. But there is a fixation with prevention because it is built on the assumption of success. My opinion is, and if you can take this home, it can help. We must design our cybersecurity controls on the assumption of failure. It's a big paradigm shift. It's a big difference between to design cybersecurity on the assumption of success or on the assumption of failure. And if you design cybersecurity on the assumption of failure, you will also start investing more in detective controls. And once something has been detected, you must correct it. 200 days is plus minus. There's a lot of research. IBM also, some states I saw talking about plus minus 200 days that it takes for a hacker to spend on an internal network without any detection. And that says that preventive controls failed. Never mind detective controls. And it is important that when we design on failure, the assumption of failure, we definitely going to be more attentive to detective controls. That talks to obviously your incident management program and so on. So we need a change in mindset. We need a paradigm shift. So there's a few lessons. We must reduce complexity as well as cost, because complexity brings more cost. Second lesson, we must be more surgical. I was in the army, and the logistics people, nobody saw the logistics as a very sexy job. But I can tell you that in any war, and we see it in the war in Ukraine, logistics is everything. And so an army that is bright will take out the logistics first. And in other words, to be surgical. And the lesson for us is, how surgical can we be? We cannot throw the entire best framework textbook at a client or to our organization. We have to be surgical, and we have to think about the complexity, we have to think about the cost, and we have to think about maintenance that is coming after that. And we have to avoid groupthink by making use of diverse group of professionals to assess cybersecurity from different countries. We have to focus on detection and correction measures. And then, obviously, we have to do more testing. You will get internal audit or external audit or cybersecurity companies to come in and to audit. But it's not necessarily testing of the controls. And that is where penetration testing, vulnerability assessments, and so on can come in. And BugBounter can reduce the cost of that. where they have a program that you can enroll on and make use of a wide variety of people across the world that is contributing to BugBounter. And you only pay if a new vulnerability has been found that you were not aware of. And there's also a scale that a low risk vulnerability will pay less for than for a higher risk vulnerability, but you will only pay when a vulnerability has been found. So cost reduction is a must. And I'm going to be a bit out of my box now, but I want to say why it is so important that we have to do look at cost reduction in the world, in our IT departments, in our corporates. We cannot think in isolation only as cyber experts, as IT experts, or as governance, risk, and compliance experts. We have to look into other people's boxes. What is currently going on in those boxes? Because it is going to impact on us. Let me show you why I say this. The Battle of the Teutoburg Forest was the most important geopolitical event in human history in the past 6,000 years. There was not a more important geopolitical event that happened in 980 than this one. You most probably will ask, but what about the First World War and the Second World War? Yes, but you will see now what I'm going to say. So the Teutoburg Forest, German people, Germanic people, not our Germans today, but there were a lot of, the French people were also Germanic tribes. Under the leadership of Arminius, ambushed the Roman Empire's legions and wiped out all their legions to the last man. It has been said that Augustus bumped his head against the wall over and over and said, bring back my legions, bring back my legions. What is important is that Roman Germania were established in northeast Roman Gaul, while the territories beyond the Rhine remained independent of Roman control. Historians agree that the Battle of Teutoburg Forest resulted in World War I and World War II. And I will say to you now why World War I and World War II is important to our topic. But in a sense, the Germans had a sense of we are not part of the rest of Europe. We are very unique. And we know from history that the Teutoburg Forest battle inspired German leaders, and that resulted in World War I and World War II. By the way, there's a Netflix series as well, the photo here in the top, if you want to go and look at it. Then I want to add to this topic. This is a book, if you want to do yourself a favor, go and buy it. It is absolutely fascinating. A lot of nuances to the theory that this person describes. There's also an Indian writer, Sarkar, that also wrote on this topic. But what they basically say is that in history, there are macro patterns. So we call it macro history as features. There are certain patterns that keep repeating. And one of the patterns is that you basically get 4 types of people when it comes to what job they do. Now, please remember, in real life, this is by far more complex. There are thousands of nuances to this. It's a very simplified version of what is described in this book. But basically, you get your king warrior, then you get your intellectual or your sage, and then you get your capitalist or your, as Priestland say here, your merchant, and then you get your worker. And these 4 castes are in struggle with each other for power. And through history, there's a turn, this wheel is turning. Now, roughly for our past 100 years or so, we had the World War I and World War II, where the king warrior dominated. Now, when I say warrior, don't see a person with a rifle in his hand or her hand only. The warrior comes in different shapes and forms. You will even get a warrior in your organization, in your business. You get your warriors, you get your intellectuals, you get your merchants, and you get your people that are just doing their jobs. So the warrior comes in different shapes and forms. World War I, World War II. 1945, the sages took over up to the middle 1970s when the America went off the gold standard. We had the oil embargo, the oil crisis. America's economy was in complete chaos, high inflation, etc. And the merchants, your Donald Reagans, your Margaret Thatchers, and so on, took over, and the capitalist took over. Now, the capitalists almost failed in 2008 with a Great Recession, but they kept their power. Now, the theory says that the worker is actually very weak caste, and they can very easily transfer their power to the warrior. Now, I'm of a belief that we are moving to the warrior state again. We did see a lot of stability from 1945. There was a power balance between the Soviet Union and the United States. That the Soviet Union collapsed, and we had the plus minus a 50-year stability still. I don't say that there were not wars, there's a lot of wars still, but we had in the international order quite some kind of a balance. And that balance is challenged now by countries like Russia, China, and so forth. Now, I don't say if they're going to win or not, that is a different topic. But that balance is getting challenged by warriors. For example, I believe that the worker class in the USA gave their power to Donald Trump, which is a warrior. Remember, warriors come in different shapes and forms. To him, the Brexit, you can also see as a kind of a warrior that took over. We see warriors in other countries as well. It's not only China and Russia. And I believe that we are moving to this side. Now, one of the signs that we need to look at for is that if a merchant, the capitalist, is going to transfer power unwillingly to the warrior. And I do see I do have some inductive observations. If we look at how many companies pulled out of Russia, where basically the political establishment have a very warrior kind of response to what happened in the Ukraine. And we have to watch very carefully if a merchant is going to abdicate to the warrior, especially when it comes to China. If things are getting more hot with Taiwan, and companies start to pull out of China, a lot of companies start to talk about it, or at least to divert some of the supply chains back to the USA, especially in chip making. We're going to see that the warrior takes over. Now, the reason why I say this, and I'm going to stop here, we as cybersecurity experts, as governance, risk and compliance experts, must look in other people's boxes. We have to look at what happens in geopolitics, what happens in the military side, etc., etc. Because if this is going to happen and we move into an era of war, I don't say in the next year or 2 or 5, could be 10, 20 years still, it's going to impact on us. If we have a scenario where North Korea, China, North Korea attacks the USA, attacks South Korea, China attacks Taiwan, Iran attacks Israel, and the rest of the Middle East, and Russia attacks Western Europe, we sit all of a sudden with very, very bad situation. We can talk about the depression, etc. And here's my point. If we keep adding complexity and just throwing best practices at the IT department, and we are not surgical, and we are not focusing on a few things when we are surgical, Are we practicing groupthink? Are we fixated with prevention, etc.? This is going to come and bite us. People, when we are all in the IT business, we cannot read only about IT and cybersecurity and what that is of interest to us. We have to read very broad so that we understand in what environment, in what context we are operating. We have to see the big picture. Thank you. And that is the end of my presentation.
Well, thank you, Michael. I think that was really insightful. I took a lot of notes, although we had some discussions previously, but I also would like to welcome Murat to contribute to what you have shared with us, if that's okay with you as well. And also I may come back to you with some questions. For example, one of the ideas that really keep me awake is about this complexity. And we have very recently wrote a blog around this VUCA world. Maybe you are also familiar with the idea. So the VUCA acronym is one of the letters C, refers to complexity. And how we can bring some clarity to complexity is one of the key topics. And so like simplification, as you mentioned, is very important idea over here. So Murat, maybe you can also give us an insight about why people are adding so much complexity in their cybersecurity ecosystem. Can it be more simplified? What do you think?
It could, it can, and it should be. Let me start with this. There are a couple of reasons. I mean, to be able to solve the problem, we have to understand it first, right? Cybersecurity solutions are becoming more and more complex and more diverse, and there are more and more cybersecurity software. There are even now orchestration software to orchestrate also all cybersecurity products and solutions. The thing is that
your voice quality is not so good. Are you also experiencing similar things?
Are you? Okay. Let me quickly change my microphone. Is it better now?
Yes, much better.
Okay, perfect. People were not concentrating on cybersecurity. Besides, we need something to establish security idea. That something initially was, even before the internet, it was the antivirus. Then with the internet, we said, okay, there is still something called security. We don't care much. We don't think about security, but we need to add something more to protect us against attacks from the internet. So what do we need? We need firewall. Okay, now let's add the firewall. Then somebody come to us and says, well, firewall is good, but firewall cannot detect the attacks. So you need the mechanism to detect the intrusions. So we installed the IDS, intrusion detection system. Then somebody else says, I have upgraded that. Now I'm not only detecting, but I'm also preventing those. So let's add IPS. On the client computer side, okay, antivirus is good, but then you need to add internal other solutions. So instead of antivirus, now we are talking EDR, XDR, some endpoint security solutions, and they are all increasing. For me, the main reason behind this existing complex tariff is because people were not concentrating enough, thinking enough on security. So they only say, okay, this is something like you have a car and there is some sort of a problem. You go and somebody tells you, okay, this car is going to go better if you just add this product, add the other product, add some other thing. And at time, currently, each and every car has, I don't know how many thousands of parts in it, right? Mm-hmm. But then Tesla came. But Tesla in terms of the car manufacturer is not concentrated on producing the electric car only. They also concentrate on how can we reduce the number of parts in a car. So of course, changing a petrol car with an electric car reduces the number of parts dramatically, I agree. But besides that, for example, having different dashboards and everything, they simply said, I'm going to put a screen here and that will be it. The rest is going to be the software. So, sorry. So even, for example, the same lead engineer, Elon Musk, they have a space company called SpaceX. And with the SpaceX, they are reducing the number of parts in their space engines over different generations dramatically. There are some videos and pictures of the same Merlin engine or some other engine. And you can see that the first version, even with Elon Musk, was so many pipes and connections, whatever. I have no idea about space engineering, so I'm not an expert on that. But the second version is just an engine with a few pipes, larger pipes, but a much fewer number of pipes, much fewer of actuators, sensors. So it will basically simple things up. And that's behind one of the reasons behind the success of SpaceX on the space travel. It's becoming cheaper, it's easier to manage, it's easier to debug, it's easier to rate. The security guys, I mean, we have a saying, it's an abbreviation from English, it's called KISS. Of course, KISS has different explanations, but the one that I like is keep it simple, secure.
Okay. Let me get back to Michiel about the same topic. So do you think it's in the human nature, Michiel, to add more complexity, or is it some of the consequences that's really, leading it to us? For example, maybe in terms of cybersecurity, is it because we are getting hacked that we are adding more complexity, or, are we making ourselves more complex and this leads us to be getting more hacked?
It is human nature. Partly, it is human nature. I believe that humans are actually very very optimistic people. I am going to give you a simple example. And I believe that might be one of the main reasons why projects are over time and over budget, is that people are over optimistic that they can achieve a certain number of things in a day. If I look at my diary, I'm still, after 53 years, I'm still over optimistic what I can achieve in one day, and I most of the time cannot achieve it. Secondly, people are also over optimistic that they can be successful. You can see it in different things. Some people you can see it in their driving, how they drive on the road. They believe they are in control of that car, and they believe it. So I think it is yes, part of human nature, but it is also a consequence of 6,000 years of generations that build on top of each other. Mm-hmm. When we got the wheel, there's a lot of things that happened since the wheel. And today we have tanks, and we have a lot of things that with wheels. Even your luggage is now on wheels. So we build, every generation built on top of the other. And when there's collapse, like with the Roman Empire, the Byzantine Empire, and so on, and then they start building again. But it escalates, and it also escalates with the population, the world population size. The more people that might generate new ideas and so on.
And also, as the complexity increase, people tend to be controlling more, but which is becoming more impossible. And
yes, and there's not.
Go ahead.
Sorry.
Go ahead,
they do not pay enough attention to the question: would we be able to maintain it? Mm-hmm. Of course, if you need because you are on logistics and you are a courier that delivers things. You're going to need a truck.
Yeah.
So I don't say don't buy a truck. It goes without saying you will have to maintain that truck. Now the question is how expensive truck and what will be the the minimum cost for maintenance. But what I do say is when we apply best practices in the security environment, first of all, are we surgical or do we just throw the jelly against the wall and hope it sticks? And ask ourselves what is really necessary, because remember, we have to maintain it.
Yeah.
You know, we see it in when Windows came out in the previous century. You know, we had Windows 3.1 and we moved up, and then we had Windows NT and so on. And every corporate sits with this, and many governments in the world that are not collecting enough tax eventually sit with a problem. They cannot update their systems. They're still sitting with, there's still companies that work with Windows XP and so on. And that's a problem. I don't say you cannot do it, but remember, we built that complexity. Is going to cost more and more and more and more to maintain it. But if we must have it, we must also be able to maintain it. Not like those wooden pallets that I had shown you. No, is it really necessary? No function. It's just for aesthetic purposes.
And myself, as a sailor, I see, a lot of big motor yachts sitting in the harbors because people think that, buying is very nice, but after they spend some hours on the water, they see how expensive is the gas and how much it consumes. Now it's not it cannot be maintained on an regular daily usage. So they try to go out once every year or something like that. And there's one nice question coming, in terms of governmental approach from one of the audience. So that's directed to yourself, Michiel. Maybe if Murat also knows ideas, he can contribute. That's about Pegasus spyware. And if you have any ideas about that, maybe you can give an answer. And what do you think about Pegasus spyware and African government's approach? And how will it affect the structure of cybersecurity in Africa? Do you have any ideas around this? And maybe Murat, you can also add, Pegasus spyware.
I'm not 100% sure what exactly the person asked, but what I can say is, and that is something that people in Africa perhaps should keep in mind. There is no such thing as friends in geopolitics. Don't say politics, geopolitics. There's no such thing. Even though the USA and the UK seems to be friends, there is no such thing as friends. If Russia and China looks like friends, they are not friends. It is connections of convenience. So every party gets something out of that relationship. Now, there is the idea, there is a fault line in Africa. There is the idea that it's only the West that was building empires and not China or Russia. Both of them built empires. Russia is a big empire and still is a big empire. And if Russia and China come, or China comes to Africa and say, we are your friends, there's no such thing as friends. Mm-hmm. It is a fact that the African Union, that China extracted terabytes of data every evening from an African Union service, basically spying. So there is no such thing as friends. So we have to be careful when our friends in geopolitics come to us with software and they are the friendly party. There's no friendly parties. There's no, most countries in the world, or the most, or let me say, the countries in North Africa, Europe, Eurasia, the Far East, where most critical geopolitical events happen, all of them were or are empires at some time. But so what I want to say is, with the software, be careful not to trust. So this is very important. Don't trust. Even if you think that country that provides you with something is your friend, don't trust.
Okay. And would you have any addition, Murat, regarding Pegasus spyware?
Yes,
I read the question again, and I've noticed that the question is not about Pegasus in general, but its effect on African continent and African countries. So unfortunately, I don't have much to add on that. But just to give a very brief intro about Pegasus, Pegasus is later on found out to be an Israeli organization who are producing spyware, government scale, government size spyware software that can actually be able to spy through phones, WhatsApp, even computers and everything. And many countries are actually buying / using it, and also some countries as well as malicious organizations are using to attack their adversaries.
Okay. And well, this is last few minutes. So I was having one last idea that was touching me during your presentation, and that was the trust on our own resources. So in that idea, I can ask this question to Murat and also Michal. How much are we getting stabbed from behind with a knife? So for example, we trust our own resources, our own employees, but how much of the percentage of hacking coming from inside? So is trusting your own people enough? It can never be enough, even by human mistake or by on purpose. Still, we have some problems over there, right?
CIA had a report that they were actually publishing yearly, Arif. I have not been able to get a hold of the newer version. I believe they still produce that. And one of the items that they produced was the percentage of attacks that is originated within the company, within the organization, instead of outside. And the number overall, the years that I was going through, so was going as high as 80%, and as low as close to 70%. So that means, I mean, at least 2/3, maybe even more, of the overall attacks, not necessarily breaches, but attacks, are originated from internal employees. It could be a very simple try to access a file that I don't have any right to access. That could also be an attack trial as well, by the way.
Yeah. So you were gonna say something here?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. As I said, in the 1960s, almost 100% control over employees, but there was still fraud, etc., errors, and so on. There was a study done, but it was quite a long time ago, and could be 20 years back in the USA, that a study looking at fraud, and the study said that 1/4 of your employees will never ever commit fraud. Never. 50% will commit fraud if the opportunity shows up. In other words, there's a vulnerability in your internal control system. And the last 1/4 are people that are constantly looking for ways to commit fraud. I think generally, and it depends on what country, but generally you can apply that to your employees.
Okay. And one last question coming from the audience. Sarika is asking this. What is your view on completely outsourcing the cybersecurity function of an organization? Is it doable? Just last sentence.
It's doable. If it is advisable, is a different topic. It depends. I mean, it depends in South Africa, and it depends on what's your definition of a small business, a mid-tier business, and a corporate business. It depends from country to country. But we get small to mid-tier companies in South Africa providing quite critical services to the corporates. Some of them outsource the entire IT, and ipso facto then also their security. And it is possible, you can do it, and I understand why you're doing it. But if you deal with very sensitive data, at least you must have some kind of control over your security. And remember, there's a difference between accountability and responsibility. So even if I, as company ABC, outsource everything, I'm still accountable, although the responsibility has been outsourced.
Thank you. So that was a wonderful talk, Michiel. I'm very, very happy that you joined us. I'm looking forward to one more session maybe in the future. And I would like to thank everyone, audience and the participants. So keep safe, keep well, keep secure. Goodbye for today.
Goodbye, everyone.
Goodbye.
Thank you for joining.